4:07 p.m. on April 21st, her Adidas jacket slung over her shoulder, looking like any other teenager heading home after a shift. What the cameras couldn't capture was that this would be the last confirmed sighting of Amanda Berry for the next decade.
Amanda Berry was another runaway who would surface when she was ready to come home. The fluorescent lights in the missing persons unit hummed their familiar tune as Detective Jennifer Walsh spread Amanda Berry's case file across her desk for what felt like the 100th time. 3 months had passed since the 16-year-old vanished after her shift at Burger King, and the trail had gone colder than a Cleveland winter. Walsh had been working missing persons for 8 years, long enough to recognize the patterns. Runaways typically surfaced within 72 hours, either coming home on their own or getting picked up somewhere predictable. The ones who stayed gone longer usually fell into darker categories that kept her awake at night. But Amanda Berry didn't fit the runaway profile, despite what the initial assessment suggested. Walsh had interviewed Amanda's mother, Luana Miller, multiple times, and the woman's anguish felt genuine, raw. Mothers of chronic runaways developed a different kind of worry, one tinged with frustration and resignation. Luana Miller's pain was pure terror. Still beating that dead horse? Detective Ray Morrison dropped into the chair across from Walsh's desk, coffee in hand. Morrison was old school, 6 months from retirement, with the cynicism that came from seeing too many cases go nowhere. "Something's not right about this one." Ray Walsh tapped her pen against Amanda's school photo. The girl's smile was bright, hopeful, not the guarded expression common among troubled teens. "Look at this. Honor roll student, close with her family, no history of acting out. She was supposed to meet her sister after work. Why would she just disappear?" Morrison shrugged. "Kids that age, they get ideas. Maybe she met some guy, decided to start fresh somewhere. Happens all the time." But Walsh had done her homework. Amanda's bank account remained untouched. Her cell phone went straight to voicemail, not turned off, but dead, as if the battery had drained. No activity on social media, no contact with friends. It was as if she'd simply vanished into thin air. The last confirmed sighting remained frustratingly brief. The security camera at Burger King showed Amanda leaving through the employee exit at 7:40 p.m., just as she'd done dozens of times before. She walked toward West 110th Street, probably heading to meet her sister at their usual spot. Then nothing. Walsh had canvassed the area repeatedly, knocking on doors, interviewing potential witnesses. One elderly woman remembered seeing a girl matching Amanda's description near the intersection around 8 o'clock, but couldn't recall any other details. A homeless man thought he'd seen someone being helped into a van, but he'd been drinking and his timeline was scattered. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. "Walsh. Detective, this is Luana Miller." Amanda's mother's voice was strained, hopeful. "I just wanted to check if there were any updates." Walsh closed her eyes briefly. These calls came every few days, and each time she had to deliver the same disappointing news. "Mrs. Miller, we're still following every lead. I know this is incredibly difficult, but we haven't given up. The FBI agent said they might be able to help if we don't find anything soon." Luana's voice cracked. "It's been 3 months, Detective. 3 months without knowing if my baby is alive or dead." "We're not at that point yet," Walsh said gently, though she'd already been considering the federal angle herself. Local missing persons cases don't automatically become FBI jurisdiction unless we have evidence of interstate activity or federal crimes. After hanging up, Walsh stared at the case file again. Standard procedure suggested scaling back the active investigation at this point. Resources were limited. New cases kept coming in, and the statistical reality was harsh. The longer someone stayed missing, the less likely they were to be found alive. But something in her gut rebelled against filing Amanda Berry away with the other cold cases. Maybe it was Luana Miller's unwavering certainty that her daughter hadn't run away. Maybe it was the complete absence of any digital footprint after Amanda's disappearance. Or maybe it was the nagging feeling that whoever took Amanda, and Walsh was increasingly convinced, someone had taken her, was still out there. She pulled out a fresh legal pad and started making lists. Every registered sex offender within a 5-mile radius of Amanda's last known location, every violent crime reported in the area during the past year, every abandoned building, vacant house, or industrial site where someone might hide a kidnapped teenager. Morrison looked over at her organized chaos and shook his head. "You're going to drive yourself crazy with this one, Jen." "Maybe," Walsh admitted, but she kept writing. "Or maybe I'm going to find her." As evening settled over Cleveland and the missing persons unit emptied out, Walsh remained at her desk, surrounded by maps and timelines and photographs of a smiling teenage girl who deserved better than being written off as another runaway statistic. Somewhere out there, Amanda Berry was either living or dead, free or captive, hoping or despairing. Walsh intended to find out which. Detective Frank Rodriguez had seen enough missing person cases to know the patterns. Young women disappeared for all kinds of reasons: abusive boyfriends, drug problems, family dysfunction, or simply the overwhelming urge to escape whatever circumstances had trapped them. When Amanda Berry's case landed on his desk in April 2003, the initial evidence seemed to fit the runaway profile perfectly. 17-year-old girl, works at Burger King on West 110th. His partner, Detective Sarah Chen, briefed him as they drove toward the restaurant. Finished her shift around 9:30 Monday night. Manager says she mentioned getting a ride home from someone, but didn't specify who. Rodriguez nodded, already forming theories. Amanda's mother, Luana Miller, had called 911 the next morning when her daughter never came home. Most teens who stayed out all night at least called. Most had done it before. According to the initial report, this was Amanda's first disappearance. The Burger King manager, a tired-looking woman named Carol, led them to the employee break room. Amanda was a good kid, she explained, pouring coffee from a pot that looked like it had been brewing since dawn. Always showed up on time, never caused trouble. That's why this is so weird. Did she mention having problems at home? Boyfriend issues? Chen asked, her notepad ready. Nothing like that. She talked about her little sister sometimes, seemed real close to her family. Carol paused, considering. There was one thing, though. That night before she left, she got a phone call, personal call. She seemed excited about something. Rodriguez leaned forward. Excited how? Like someone had offered her something good. A ride, maybe, or plans for later. She was smiling when she hung up. They spent the next hour interviewing other employees, but the picture remained frustratingly vague. Amanda had been her usual self during the shift, maybe slightly more upbeat than normal. She'd left through the back door around 9:30, like always. No one saw her get into a car or talk to anyone outside. Back at the station, Rodriguez began building Amanda's profile. Honor student at John Marshall High School. No criminal record, not even truancy issues. Her mother worked 2 jobs to support Amanda and her younger daughter. The family lived in a modest house on East 71st Street, in a neighborhood where people knew each other's business. Could be she met someone online, Chen suggested, settling into her desk chair. Kids that age, they think they know who they're talking to, but predators are getting smarter about building trust. Rodriguez had considered that angle. Internet predators were becoming a growing concern, though the department's resources for tracking online activity remained limited. We'll need to get into her computer, see if there are any suspicious contacts. The forensic team's examination of Amanda's laptop revealed an active social media presence typical for a teenager in 2003. She chatted with classmates, shared music recommendations, complained about homework. There were no obvious red flags, no conversations with older men, no plans to meet strangers, no signs of grooming behavior. As days turned into weeks, Rodriguez felt the case slipping into the category he dreaded most, the unsolved file. Amanda's mother called daily, sometimes twice daily, begging for updates. Her desperation was palpable, and Rodriguez found himself staying late, rereading witness statements, hoping something would jump out at him. Maybe she did run away, Chen said one evening. finding Rodriguez still at his desk at nearly 10 o'clock. Maybe whatever was happening at home was worse than anyone knew. But that theory didn't hold up under scrutiny. Rodriguez had interviewed Amanda's teachers, her friends, her family members. Everyone painted the same picture: a responsible teenager with college plans and strong family ties. No history of depression or rebellion, no secret boyfriends or hidden trauma. The phone call at work remained the most promising lead, but Burger King's phone records showed only the restaurant's main number. If someone had reached Amanda directly on her cell phone, they'd need carrier records, which required subpoenas and paperwork that could take weeks. By summer, the department's attention had shifted to newer cases. Rodriguez kept Amanda's file active, but without fresh leads or evidence, there was little to investigate. He drove past the Burger King occasionally, hoping something would occur to him, some angle he'd missed. Luana Miller organized search parties and distributed flyers throughout Cleveland. She appeared on local news programs, pleading for information about her daughter's whereabouts. Rodriguez attended some of these events, partly out of professional duty and partly because he genuinely hoped someone would come forward with useful information. "People don't just vanish," Luana told him after one particularly unsuccessful search. "Someone knows something. Someone saw something." Rodriguez agreed, but Cleveland was a big city with a lot of dark corners. If someone wanted to hide a person, or worse, they had plenty of options. Still, something about Amanda's case nagged at him. The timing was too clean, too convenient. Someone had called her at exactly the right moment, offered her exactly the right incentive to get into their car. That suggested planning, and planning suggested someone who knew her routine, her workplace, her vulnerabilities, someone who had been watching. Detective Maria Santos had been working missing persons for 8 years when the Amanda Berry case landed on her desk, but something about this one felt different from the start. The 17-year-old's disappearance had all the hallmarks of a runaway situation: troubled home life, recent arguments with her mother, a pattern of staying out late, yet the details nagged at her like a persistent headache. She spread the case files across her cluttered desk on a grey February morning, 3 weeks after Amanda had vanished. The Burger King security footage showed the teenager leaving work at 7:40 p.m. on April 21, 2003, walking toward the bus stop on Lorraine Avenue. After that, nothing. No sightings, no phone calls, no activity on her bank account. Santos picked up the phone and dialed Amanda's mother, Luana Miller, for what felt like the 100th time. The woman's voice cracked with exhaustion and desperation. "Any news, detective?" "I'm still working every angle, Mrs. Miller. Can you walk me through that phone call one more time? The one Amanda made around 8 p.m.? Luana's sigh carried the weight of a mother's worst fears. She said she was getting a ride home from work. Someone had offered. She sounded normal, maybe a little excited, like maybe it was someone she knew. Santos scribbled notes, circling the word excited multiple times. In her experience, runaways didn't typically sound excited when making what would become their final phone call home. They sounded angry, defiant, or distant, not excited about a ride. Did she mention a name? Anything about who was giving her this ride? No, nothing. The call was so short, I keep replaying it in my head, wondering if I missed something. After hanging up, Santos drove to the Burger King where Amanda had worked. The manager, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, led her through the restaurant to the employee break room. "Amanda was a good kid," the manager explained, pouring coffee from a pot that had seen better days. "Showed up on time, didn't cause trouble. Some of the girls here, they're always dealing with boyfriend drama or family problems, but Amanda seemed different, focused. Any regular customers who paid special attention to her? Anyone who made her uncomfortable?" The manager's expression shifted slightly. There was this one guy, older, maybe in his 40s. He'd come in sometimes during Amanda's shifts, always ordered the same thing: Whopper, no pickles, large Coke. But he'd watch her while he ate. Made some of the other girls nervous. Santos felt her pulse quicken. "Can you describe him?" "Hispanic guy, maybe Puerto Rican. Medium build, kind of scruffy beard. Drove an older car, white or light-colored. But detective, I haven't seen him since Amanda disappeared. That afternoon, Santos canvassed the neighborhood around the bus stop where Amanda was last seen. The area was a mix of small businesses, aging houses, and empty lots that spoke to Cleveland's economic struggles. Most people she spoke with were polite but unhelpful. They hadn't seen anything unusual that night. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman sweeping her front porch, who provided the first real lead. She remembered seeing a young girl talking to someone in a white car near the bus stop around the time Amanda disappeared. "I didn't think much of it then," Mrs. Rodriguez said, leaning on her broom. "Kids are always getting rides." But the girl seemed hesitant at first, like maybe she wasn't sure about getting in. Then she did anyway. "Can you remember anything about the car or the driver?" "Old car, maybe from the 80s, white but dirty. The man inside, I couldn't see his face clearly from here, but he seemed older than the girl. That's what struck me as odd." Santos spent the next several hours pulling DMV records for white vehicles registered in the area, cross-referencing them with criminal histories. The list was disappointingly long, and many of the vehicles had changed hands multiple times or been junked years ago. As evening approached, she found herself back at her desk, staring at Amanda's school photo. The girl's bright smile seemed to mock the growing stack of dead-end leads and false sightings. Santos had worked dozens of missing person cases, and she'd developed an instinct for which ones would resolve quickly and which would haunt her sleep for months. This case felt different. Every piece of evidence pointed away from the runaway theory that her colleagues had readily accepted. Amanda Berry hadn't run away, she'd been taken. Santos was certain of it. But being certain and proving it were two entirely different things. She opened a fresh case file and began documenting everything again from the beginning. Somewhere in these details was the thread that would lead to Amanda Berry. She just had to keep pulling until something unraveled. The city hummed outside her office window as darkness settled over Cleveland, carrying with it the secrets of what had really happened on Lorraine Avenue 3 weeks ago. Detective Ray Martinez had worked missing persons for 8 years, but the Gina de Jesus case gnawed at him differently than the others. Maybe it was the mother's unwavering determination, or maybe it was the eerie similarities to Amanda Berry's disappearance the year before. Both girls were young, both had vanished from the same general area, and both cases had gone cold faster than anyone wanted to admit. The morning of April 2nd, 2004, started like any other. Martinez sat at his desk, reviewing case files while nursing his third cup of coffee. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the stack of missing person reports that seemed to multiply overnight. Cleveland's west side had always been rough, but lately it felt like young women were disappearing into thin air. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Nancy Ruiz's voice came through the receiver, strained but determined. She had been calling twice a week for months, asking about her daughter's case, demanding updates that Martinez wished he had. "Detective Martinez, I had another dream about Gina last night. She was calling for help, but I couldn't reach her." Nancy's voice cracked slightly. "Please tell me you have something new." Martinez leaned back in his chair, staring at the photo of 14-year-old Gina pinned to his bulletin board. Dark hair, bright smile, the same hopeful expression that haunted too many of these cases. "Mrs. Ruiz, I'm following up on some leads. The tip line is still active, and we're reviewing security footage from businesses along Lorraine Avenue again." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely false either. The reality was that leads had dried up weeks ago. Gina de Jesus had been walking home from school, just 2 blocks away from safety when she vanished. No witnesses, no surveillance footage, no physical evidence. Just another teenage girl swallowed by the streets of Cleveland. After hanging up, Martinez pulled out the De Jesus file and spread the contents across his desk. School records, friend interviews, family statements, neighborhood canvas reports. Everything painted the picture of a normal kid who should have made it home that Tuesday afternoon. Her friend Arlene Castro had been the last person to see her alive, walking toward West 105th and Lorraine around 3 p.m. The Castro girls' statement had been straightforward. They had left school together, planning to call Gina's mother from Arlene's house to ask permission for a sleepover. But at the last minute, Gina changed her mind and decided to walk home instead. Arlene went to her house. Gina headed toward hers, and somewhere in those 2 blocks, she disappeared. Martinez had interviewed Arlene 3 times, each conversation yielding the same details. The girl seemed genuinely distraught about her friend's disappearance, crying during each interview. Her father, Ariel Castro, had been cooperative too, even helping with the search efforts in the neighborhood. It was the kind of community response that usually helped break cases open, but not this time. The detective's attention turned to the map on his wall, dotted with red pins marking locations connected to recent missing person cases. Amanda Berry's last known location sat less than a mile from where Gina had vanished. The proximity wasn't lost on him, but without concrete evidence linking the cases, it remains just an unsettling coincidence in a city full of them. Martinez's partner, Detective Thompson, approached his desk carrying a steaming cup of coffee and a grim expression. "Any luck with the De Jesus case?" "Same dead ends," Martinez replied, tapping his pen against the desk. "I keep thinking about the Berry girl too. 2 young women, same area, same lack of evidence. Either we're dealing with someone very lucky or very smart." Thompson nodded, settling into the chair across from Martinez's desk. "What about the reward money?" The family scraped together $5,000. Sometimes that loosens tongues. Posted flyers everywhere, ran it in the paper, got it on the local news. Nothing solid came through. Lots of supposed sightings, but they all led nowhere. Martinez shuffled through witness statements, each one representing hours of investigation that had yielded nothing useful. The mother calls twice a week, asking if I have updates. I hate telling her no every time. The 2 detectives sat in contemplative silence, surrounded by the ambient noise of the police station. Phones ringing, conversations echoing down hallways, the constant hum of activity that never seemed to bring resolution to the cases that mattered most. Martinez gathered the files and photographs, preparing to store them back in the cabinet that held too many similar cases. But something made him pause, holding Gina's school picture up to the light. 14 years old, full of life, with plans that would never be fulfilled. "I'm not giving up on this one," he said quietly, more to himself than to Thompson. "That girl is out there somewhere, and her family deserves answers." He didn't know that those answers would come, but not for nearly another decade. Detective Jennifer Walsh had seen enough missing persons cases to recognize the pattern. Young women, usually between 14 and 21, vanishing from the same rough stretch of Lorraine Avenue. The connecting thread wasn't immediately obvious to most people, but after 15 years working Cleveland's streets, Walsh had developed an instinct for the invisible lines that predators drew through neighborhoods. She spread the case files across her desk like tarot cards, each manila folder representing a life interrupted. Amanda Berry's photo stared up at her from the most recent addition to what she'd privately begun calling her Lost Girls collection. 16 years old, last seen leaving her job at Burger King on April 21, 2003. The official department line was runaway. Teenage girls left home all the time, especially ones from broken families in struggling neighborhoods. But Walsh couldn't shake the feeling that Amanda's disappearance fit a darker pattern. The first case that had caught her attention was Gina De Jesus, who'd vanished the year before Amanda, just 14 when she failed to come home from school. Then there was Michelle Knight, 21 when she disappeared in 2002 after missing a court hearing regarding custody of her son. 3 women, 3 different circumstances, but all last seen within a few miles of each other on Cleveland's west side. Walsh pulled out a street map and began marking locations with red pins. Michelle's last known whereabouts were near West 106th and Lorraine. Gina had been walking home from Wilbur Wright Middle School, her route taking her along West 105th. Amanda's Burger King sat at West 110th and Lorraine. The pins formed a tight cluster that made Walsh's stomach turn. The detective had tried to raise concerns about potential connections between the cases, but her suggestions had fallen on deaf ears. The department was understaffed and overworked. Missing persons cases involving young women from low-income families rarely generated the resources needed for extensive investigations. Michelle Knight's disappearance had been particularly dismissed. She was an adult with a history of running away, and the assumption was she'd simply taken off again. Walsh knew these assumptions were dangerous. She'd seen how quickly the trail went cold when investigators wrote off missing persons as voluntary departures. Evidence wasn't preserved with the same urgency. Witnesses weren't interviewed while memories were fresh, and critical early hours were lost to bureaucratic indifference. She opened Michelle Knight's file and reviewed the sparse details. Michelle had been scheduled to appear in court regarding custody of her 11-year-old son, but never showed up. Her family reported that she was excited about the hearing and had been preparing for weeks. It made no sense that she would voluntarily miss such an important appointment. Yet the case had been coded as a voluntary missing person within days. Gina de Jesus's disappearance had generated more attention, partly because she was younger and partly because her family had been more persistent in demanding police action. Her mother, Nancy Ruiz, had organized search parties and kept Gina's story in local media. But even that case had gradually faded from active investigation as months passed without leads. Amanda Berry's case was still fresh, the family still hopeful, but Walsh could already see the same trajectory beginning. The initial burst of investigative energy was waning, and other cases were competing for detectives' attention. What frustrated Walsh most was the geographical clustering that seemed so obvious to her, but which hadn't generated any systematic response from the department. She'd worked enough predator cases to know that serial offenders often operated within comfort zones, familiar territories where they knew the streets, the patterns, the vulnerabilities. The Lorraine Avenue corridor fit that profile perfectly. It was a struggling commercial strip with plenty of foot traffic, multiple bus stops, and enough economic desperation to create vulnerability. Young women walking alone weren't unusual, and the area's reputation meant that disappearances could be easily explained away as drug-related or voluntary departures from difficult circumstances. Walsh picked up her phone and dialed the FBI's Cleveland office. She'd been considering making this call for weeks, knowing it might not be well received by her superiors. But federal involvement could bring resources and analytical capabilities that the Cleveland Police Department simply didn't have. "This is Detective Walsh with Cleveland PD," she said when the call connected. "I'd like to speak with someone about a potential pattern in missing persons cases. I think we might have a serial abductor operating on the West Side." The conversation that followed was professional but non-committal. The FBI agent took down the basic information, but explained that federal involvement in missing persons cases typically required evidence of interstate activity or clear signs of organized criminal activity. 3 disappearances over 18 months, while concerning, didn't automatically trigger federal resources. After hanging up, Walsh stared at the map again. The red pins seemed to pulse with urgency that she couldn't convey to anyone else. Somewhere out there, she was certain, these 3 women were either being held against their will or their remains were waiting to be discovered. Every day that passed without action felt like a betrayal of their families and a failure of the system meant to protect them. She began drafting a formal memo to her captain, requesting dedicated resources to investigate potential connections between the 3 cases. It was a long shot, but Detective Walsh wasn't ready to let these women disappear into bureaucratic indifference. Detective Mike Jones had worked missing persons for 12 years, but the Berry case gnawed at him differently than the others. While his colleagues had moved on to fresher leads and more promising investigations, he found himself returning to Amanda's file during quiet moments, studying the sparse details like a crossword puzzle missing half its clues. The initial response had been textbook for a 17-year-old who'd vanished without obvious signs of foul play. Amanda had been scheduled to work at Burger King that April evening in 2003, but never showed up. Her last confirmed sighting was leaving her job at the nearby cellular phone store, walking toward the bus stop she used daily. No witnesses to an abduction, no suspicious vehicles, no immediate evidence of violence. Runaway became the operative assumption almost immediately. Amanda's mother, Luana Miller, had fought this classification from day one, insisting her daughter would never leave voluntarily. But the statistics supported the department's initial assessment. Thousands of teenagers disappeared each year in Cleveland alone, and the vast majority returned home within days or weeks after cooling off from family disputes or romantic problems. Jones had believed this too. Initially, the alternative, that a young woman could simply vanish from a busy street in broad daylight, seemed less plausible than the familiar pattern of teenage rebellion. He'd seen it countless times before: arguments with parents, academic pressure, relationship drama, all culminating in an impulsive decision to disappear for a while. But as weeks turned to months, then years, Jones began questioning the runaway theory more seriously. Luana Miller's persistent advocacy played a role in keeping the case alive in his mind, but it was the details that didn't quite fit that truly bothered him. Amanda had left behind money, personal belongings, and most tellingly, had made no contact with friends or family members she was close to. In Jones's experience, even the most determined runaways typically reached out to someone eventually. The case took on new dimensions as similar disappearances accumulated over the following years. Gina de Jesus vanished in 2004, just 14 years old, last seen walking home from school. Like Amanda, she simply evaporated from a familiar route she'd traveled hundreds of times before. The proximity of the disappearances, both girls lived in the same general area of Cleveland's west side, suggested potential connections, but without witnesses or physical evidence, investigators could only speculate. Michelle Knight had disappeared in 2002, though her case received significantly less attention initially. At 21, she fell outside the typical age range that generated intense media coverage and community concern. Her troubled background and strained family relationships meant fewer people noticed her absence immediately, and when they did, the assumption was that she'd left voluntarily to escape personal problems. Jones began creating unofficial connections between these cases in his own files, tracking patterns and geographical relationships that might reveal something the individual investigations had missed. He mapped the locations where each woman had last been seen, noting they formed a rough triangle within a few square miles of Cleveland's Clark-Fulton neighborhood. The proximity seemed too coincidental to ignore, but without concrete evidence linking the disappearances, his superiors remained skeptical of any connection. The detectives' growing obsession with these cases created tension within the department. Resources were limited, and cold cases, particularly those involving assumed runaways, received minimal priority compared to fresh investigations. Jones found himself pursuing leads on his own time, following up on tips that had been deemed unworthy of official investigation. He interviewed family members repeatedly, hoping fresh conversations might reveal details that had been overlooked initially. Luana Miller became a regular contact, calling Jones whenever new information surfaced or when she felt the investigation was losing momentum. These conversations were often difficult. Jones wanted to provide hope without making promises he couldn't keep. The psychological toll of unsolved cases was something every detective learned to manage, but some cases proved more resistant to compartmentalization than others. Jones found himself driving through the neighborhood where the women had disappeared during off-duty hours, studying the streets and houses for anything that might provide insight. The area was typical of many Cleveland neighborhoods, a mix of modest homes, small businesses, and vacant lots where demolished buildings had once stood. Media attention for the cases fluctuated over time, with anniversary coverage generating renewed tips and leads that typically led nowhere. Jones dutifully followed up on each credible report, interviewing witnesses who claimed to have seen one of the missing women in other cities, following up on potential sightings that invariably proved to be cases of mistaken identity. By 2010, 7 years after Amanda's disappearance, Jones had been promoted to lead detective for major crimes, but he maintained unofficial oversight of the missing persons cases that had defined much of his career. The files remained open, but active investigation had essentially ceased. The department's position remained unchanged. These were likely runaway cases where the individuals had chosen to remain hidden, possibly living under different identities in other cities. Jones never fully accepted this explanation, but he'd exhausted most investigative avenues available to him. The cases would require either new evidence or an extraordinary break to move forward. The call came in at 6:14 p.m. on May 6, 2013. Detective Sandra Martinez was wrapping up paperwork when dispatch crackled through the precinct with an urgency that made everyone stop what they were doing. "We've got a possible kidnapping victim on Seymour Avenue. Female caller says she's Amanda Berry. She's been missing for 10 years. Martinez felt her blood freeze. Amanda Berry. Every cop in Cleveland knew that name, had seen the missing person flyers that still occasionally surfaced around the city. The girl who disappeared after her shift at Burger King in 2003. The case that had gone cold despite years of investigation. "I'm en route," Martinez radioed back, already grabbing her keys. Her partner, Detective Ray Kovac, was right behind her. The drive to Seymour Avenue took 8 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Martinez's mind raced through the possibilities. Could it really be her? After 10 years? The neighborhood they were heading to was rough. Boarded-up houses, vacant lots, the kind of area where people minded their own business and didn't ask questions. They arrived at 2207 Seymour Avenue to find patrol units already on scene, their red and blue lights cutting through the gathering dusk. The house looked like dozens of others on the block, weathered, isolated, unremarkable, exactly the kind of place someone could hide for years. Martinez approached the front steps, where a young woman sat wrapped in a blanket, surrounded by paramedics and officers. Even after a decade, even with the obvious toll of whatever she'd endured, Martinez recognized her immediately from the missing person photos. Amanda Berry was alive. "Amanda," Martinez said gently, crouching down to eye level. "I'm Detective Martinez. You're safe now." Amanda looked up with eyes that had seen too much. She was thin, pale, but there was a strength there that had somehow survived. Next to her sat a small girl, maybe 6 years old, clinging to Amanda's hand. "This is my daughter," Amanda said, her voice hoarse but determined. "Jocelyn. She was born in that house." The implications hit Martinez like a physical blow. Born in that house. A child who had never known the outside world until this moment. "Amanda, we need to secure the scene," Martinez said carefully. "Are there others in—" "Yes." Amanda's grip tightened on her daughter's hand. "Gina de Jesus. She's still in there. And Michelle Knight. They're both upstairs." Gina de Jesus. Martinez knew that name too. Another missing girl vanished in 2004. She'd been 14, and Michelle Knight missing since 2002. 3 women held captive for over a decade in plain sight. Martinez radioed for backup as tactical teams prepared to enter the house. The scene was chaos. More patrol cars arriving, FBI notifications going out, media already getting wind of something big happening on Seymour Avenue. Inside the house, officers found Gina and Michelle, both alive but traumatized. The interior was a maze of locks, chains, and makeshift barriers, bedrooms that were clearly prisons, evidence of a systematic, methodical imprisonment that had lasted over 10 years. As the evening wore on, the full scope of the horror began to emerge. Ariel Castro, the homeowner, had been arrested trying to return to the house. Initial interviews revealed a pattern of manipulation, control, and abuse that defied comprehension. Martinez found herself assigned as the lead detective coordinator, tasked with managing what would become one of the most complex victim recovery operations in Cleveland's history. 3 women, each with their own story of survival, each requiring careful, patient questioning to piece together a decade of captivity. The media circus was immediate and overwhelming. News vans lined Seymour Avenue within hours. National outlets picked up the story. The house that had hidden such secrets for so long was now the center of international attention. But Martinez's focus remained on the victims. Amanda, who had somehow managed to kick out the door and call 911 when Castro briefly left the house unlocked. Gina, who had been just a child when she was taken, now a young woman. Michelle, who had been missing so long that many had assumed she was dead. Each woman would need extensive medical care, psychological support, and protection from the media frenzy. Each had a family to reconnect with, relationships to rebuild, a world to re-enter that had moved on without them for over a decade. As Martinez coordinated with social services, victim advocates, and federal investigators, she kept thinking about Amanda's 911 call, the desperation in her voice, but also the determination. After 10 years of captivity, she had found a moment of opportunity and seized it, not just for herself, but for the other women trapped in that house. The investigation was just beginning, but one thing was already clear. These weren't just survivors, they were fighters who had endured the unthinkable and lived to see justice. Martinez was determined to make sure they got it. Detective Jennifer Jacobs had seen enough missing persons cases to know when one didn't fit the pattern. As she reviewed the Amanda Berry file for what felt like the 100th time, the familiar weight of unfinished business pressed against her chest. 3 years had passed since she'd inherited the case from Detective Phil Torsney, and the yellow folder had grown thick with dead ends and false leads. The afternoon sun slanted through the precinct windows as she spread the contents across her desk. Amanda's school photo stared back at her. That bright smile, those hopeful eyes that had no idea what was coming. Jacobs had requested the case reassignment specifically because something about it gnawed at her. Runaway teen, the initial report had concluded. Case closed, resources redirected. But Jacobs knew runaways, and Amanda Berry wasn't one. She picked up the witness statements from Burger King, where Amanda had worked her last shift on April 21, 2003. Normal behavior, co-workers reported. No signs of distress, no mentions of plans to leave home. Amanda had been excited about her upcoming birthday, had talked about spending time with her baby daughter. These weren't the words and actions of a girl planning to disappear. The phone on her desk rang, jarring her from her thoughts. Detective Jacobs, this is Linda from Dispatch. We've got another missing person report that might interest you. Gina de Jesus, 14 years old, disappeared yesterday afternoon on her way home from school. Jacobs felt her pulse quicken. 2 missing girls from the same general area of Cleveland, both around the same age. It could be coincidence, but her instincts told her otherwise. "I'll be right there," she said, already reaching for her jacket. The De Jesus family lived in a modest house on West 105th Street, just a few miles from where Amanda Berry had vanished. As Jacobs pulled up to the curb, she could see the controlled chaos of a family in crisis. Cars filled the driveway, neighbors clustered on the front lawn, and missing person flyers were already being prepared in the living room. Felix de Jesus met her at the door, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and fear. Behind him, Nancy de Jesus paced the hallway, clutching a cordless phone like a lifeline. "Thank you for coming, Detective," Felix said, his voice hoarse. "Nobody seems to understand. Gina wouldn't just leave. She's not that kind of kid." Jacobs had heard those exact words before, from Luana Miller when Amanda first went missing. The parallel sent a chill down her spine. She spent the next 2 hours interviewing family members and friends, building a timeline of Gina's last known movements. The girl had left Wilbur Wright Middle School with her friend Arlene Castro around 3 p.m. planning to walk to Arlene's house. But somewhere between the school and home, Gina had simply vanished. "Did she know Amanda Berry?" Jacobs asked Felix as they sat at the kitchen table. He shook his head slowly. "I don't think so. different schools, different neighborhoods, really. Why? Jacobs didn't answer directly. It was too early to voice her suspicions, too premature to worry the family with connections that might not exist. But as she drove back to the precinct that evening, she couldn't shake the feeling that these disappearances were linked. Over the following weeks, she worked both cases simultaneously, looking for intersections. She mapped the locations where each girl had last been seen, studied their routines, their friends, their families. On the surface, Amanda and Gina had little in common beyond their age and the fact that they'd both vanished without a trace in the same city. But patterns weren't always obvious. Sometimes they lurked beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. She pulled strings to get additional resources, arguing that 2 missing girls warranted more attention than either case had received individually. The department was spread thin, the missing persons unit understaffed, but Jacobs managed to convince her supervisor to let her pursue both investigations. Late one night, as she sat surrounded by case files and crime scene photos, her partner, Detective Ray Lopez, found her still at her desk. "You need to go home, Jen," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "These cases are eating you alive." "Something's not right about this," she replied, not looking up from the files. 2 girls, similar ages, both described as responsible kids who wouldn't just run away, both from the West Side, both vanished in broad daylight. Could be coincidence. Could be. But what if it's not? Lopez studied her face, recognizing the determination he'd seen before when she locked onto a case. "What do you need?" "More eyes on this. More resources. And people to stop assuming these girls just ran away because it's easier than admitting we might have a predator working our streets." As she spoke the words aloud, Jacobs felt the weight of possibility settle around her. Somewhere in Cleveland, if her instincts were right, someone had taken these girls, and if she was wrong about them being runaways, then Amanda and Gina were still out there, waiting for someone to find them. Detective Jennifer Jacobs had seen enough crime scenes to know when something was fundamentally wrong with the world. Standing in the living room of 2207 Seymour Avenue, watching the evidence technicians methodically document every chain, every padlock, every makeshift barricade, she felt that familiar weight settling in her chest. This wasn't just another case. This was a glimpse into a particular kind of hell that most people couldn't imagine existed in their neighborhoods. The house had been secured for 3 days now, but the smell still hit her every time she walked through the door. Not just the mustiness of a building that had been sealed off from fresh air for years, but something deeper. Fear had a scent she'd learned over her 15-year career. It lingered in places where terrible things happened repeatedly. She pulled out her notebook and reviewed the initial statements they'd collected from the 3 women. Amanda Berry, 27 now, had been the most forthcoming, perhaps because she'd been the one to make that desperate phone call. Gina de Jesus, 23, spoke in whispers and kept asking if she could call her mother. Michelle Knight, 32, had barely said anything at all, just watched everyone with eyes that seemed to catalogue every movement, every expression. The evidence was overwhelming in its scope and disturbing in its detail. Castro had documented his own crimes with a meticulousness that made Jacobs's skin crawl. Journals filled with his thoughts about the women. Photographs that would never see the light of day outside a courtroom. Receipts for chains and locks purchased over the span of a decade. Her phone buzzed. "Lieutenant Morrison, Jacobs, where are we on the victimology?" "Media's crawling up my ass for details." "Still building the timeline," she replied, stepping into what had once been a dining room. "We're looking at 3 separate abductions spanning 9 years. Different methods, different circumstances, but all within a few miles of each other." She'd spent the morning reviewing the original missing persons files. Amanda Berry's case had generated significant media attention initially, especially after her mother's appearance on a television talk show, pleading for her daughter's return. Gina de Jesus had also been actively searched for, given her age and the involvement of her family in the community. But Michelle Knight's disappearance had barely registered. a 20-year-old who'd lost custody of her son, who'd been fighting with family members, who'd missed appointments before. The assumption had been that she'd left voluntarily. That assumption haunted Jacobs now. How many other cases had they written off too quickly? The technical team had found evidence of multiple pregnancies in the house, medical supplies hidden in closets. The implications were staggering, but the women weren't ready to discuss everything yet. Dr. Sarah Chen, the psychiatrist working with the victims, had warned the investigators about pushing too hard, too fast. They've been in survival mode for years, Dr. Chen had explained. Their ability to trust, to feel safe enough to remember and articulate trauma, it's going to take time to develop. Jacobs understood, but the prosecutor's office was already breathing down their necks for a complete picture. The public wanted answers. The families wanted justice. And somewhere in between those demands were three women who needed space to remember how to exist in a world that hadn't protected them the first time. She climbed the stairs to the second floor, where most of the physical evidence had been concentrated. The bedrooms told stories that would fuel nightmares for anyone who read the case files. Chains bolted to walls, windows boarded shut from the inside, makeshift alarms rigged to alert Castro if anyone tried to move around when he wasn't home. The bedroom at the front of the house appeared to be where Amanda had been held most recently. It was slightly larger than the others, with marginally better ventilation. Jacobs wondered if this represented some twisted evolution in Castro's treatment of his victims, or if Amanda's status as the mother of his child had earned her these small improvements in conditions. Her partner, Detective Ray Martinez, appeared in the doorway. "Neighbor interviews are painting an interesting picture," he said. Multiple people heard crying, screaming, even saw naked women in the yard occasionally. But Castro was friendly, helpful, played music with some of them. Nobody wanted to believe what they were seeing. This was the part that would haunt the community long after the legal proceedings ended. The knowledge that three women had been trapped in plain sight, that their suffering had been audible to people who chose not to act on their suspicions. Jacobs closed her notebook and took one last look around the room. Tomorrow, they'd begin the painstaking process of building a timeline that spanned a decade. They'd interview hundreds of witnesses, process thousands of pieces of evidence, and slowly construct a case that would ensure Ariel Castro never had the opportunity to hurt anyone again. But tonight, she'd go home to her own family and try to forget the sound of chains scraping against wooden floors.